All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Your Hour with APA Virginia is hosted on the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 p.m. Only this month, it's a week earlier. We are going to give everyone a minute to log in and get settled before we dive right into the presentation. All right. Thank you again for joining our webinar today. Before we get started, I want to remind you of a couple of housekeeping items. Um, as we do every month, this webinar, How Dense is Your Sprawl, will be recorded and posted to the chapter's YouTube page, which is this right here. We will It will be recorded and posted by the end of the day. We encourage you to visit our YouTube and see past webinars or share it with colleagues. As a reminder, we hold all questions until the end, but as the webinar is going on, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box on your dashboard, and we will answer them at the end in the order in which they came in. Again, thank you to the Berkeley Group for making this webinar series possible. We are always looking for new webinar presenters or topics. So if you have one you would like us to look into, please email us at admin@apavirginia.com. So at this time, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can get to know our panelists a little bit better. This month's webinar, How Dense is Your Sprawl, is presented by Jason SP. Okay, we're ready. Okay, Jason is a principal planner with a EPRPC with over 20 years of experience in planning, community development, and project management. He has worked in both the nonprofit and private sectors, serving a wide range of public clientele, including local governments, NPOs, regional, state, and federal agencies. Since 2012, he has worked closely with the U.S. EPA's Office of Community Revitalization to deliver planning assistance on several smart growth topics, such as local food systems, Main Street revitalization, green and complete streets, and improving mobility and walkability. Through the EPA program, he has led action planning workshops in over 45 communities nationwide. On the technical side, Jason has served as a task lead on several GIS land use modeling and scenario planning projects in Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Texas. He has led several urban development area planning projects for communities across Virginia through OIPI. He holds a bachelor in world history from the State of New York College of Purchase and a master of urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia School of Architecture. He is proud to serve on the APA Virginia chapter board as your treasurer. Jason calls Charlottesville, Virginia home, enjoys reading in the recreating in the great outdoors, visiting vibrant downtowns, live music, and growing food. Up next, we have Danny Yoder, AICP. Danny is a senior planner with expertise in multimodal transportation planning. Recently with EPRPC in Charlottesville, Danny is joining Streetlight Data customer service team as an engagement executive. Prior to moving to Charlottesville, Danny worked for the New York City Department of Transportation, leading policy studies and planning and designing street design projects. In New York, Danny focused on transit policy and implementing projects that prioritize transit, pedestrians, and bike riders. Danny earned a Master of City and Regional Planning degree from Rutgers University. And last but certainly not least, we have Vlad. Vlad, AICP, is a principal with EPR in Charlottesville, Virginia, trained as a planner and architect. He has 35 years of experience in community and transportation planning and urban design. He has leadership in numerous planning and design projects at the local, state, and federal levels throughout the country. His work on demographic research for Virginia's statewide transportation plan, as well as many local communities, brings him a unique perspective on how and where Virginia has grown over the past few decades. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn everything over to our presenters today.
Great. Thank you, Paige. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to APA Virginia, the Brook Group, for hosting and sponsoring this webinar series. I've attended and viewed many of them. I've enjoyed their topics, the diversity and the breadth of the topics they cover. And today, happy Monday, everybody, we have for you a presentation we are calling How Dense is Your Sprawl? It's a look at land development and growth in Virginia communities. There may be some aha moments, and there may be some that's obvious moments in our presentation, but we'll cover all the data, the methodology, and some initial takeaways from our observations. But there's also, I think, upwards of 100 planners in attendance, and it's likely your community might be one of the ones we highlight today. So at the Q&A part of this, or the discussion part of this, we welcome your commentary as well as we sort of look through this data. But first, let's find out who's in the virtual room today. As a panelist, I can see who's in attendance, but I don't think all of you can. So if you want to find the chat and introduce yourself in the chat at this time, your name and affiliation would be useful. And we're also going to do a short poll right now to get a sense of who's in the room. But first, if people could go to the chat and type in their name, affiliation, and that way you all can see who else is here today. Let me go. We're going to launch a poll. We have a poll. I'm going to launch it in 1 second or in a couple seconds. And there's two questions. Do you work in the public sector, private sector, or nonprofit? And the other is, what is your APA Virginia section? And there's all the sections listed as well as a map there. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. And you should see a poll window pop up on your screen. And there's two questions: public sector, private sector, nonprofit, and then what APA Virginia section are you in? And I can see people are beginning to respond to this poll. Looks like, oh, you guys are good. You guys are good. Give a couple more seconds. We have 72 of 82 responding. All right, I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 right now and share results. Excellent. We have, let's see, 67% are public sector. We have 25% private, and we have 8% are nonprofit or other. We have, in terms of the sections of Virginia represented, Northern Virginia is the largest representation of folks here. We have Central is 23%, Hampton Roads is 10%, Shenandoah Valley 10%, Northern Virginia 10%. So we have some guests here from outside the Commonwealth. All right, well, thanks for that. And I see the chat has been coming in. I don't have a chance to go over that right now, but let's move right along. And Vlad.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you all, fellow planners, for taking an hour out of your lunch to geek out with us over some maps and data. Hopefully you find it interesting. This webinar, what started it was some work we were doing for the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment on the statewide plan, VTrans. And we were looking at demographic trends and how localities grew and the impacts it might have on transportation investments. As we were looking at this data, we're noticing that localities were growing differently in terms of how many people or jobs they grew versus how much land was being developed, because we were looking at that, and Jason's going to talk about the methodology we used. So that got us thinking, could we come up with a way to measure how localities were sprawling or densifying as they were grown? And this idea of an efficiency factor came up. And efficiency is kind of a value-laden word. So as you'll see, we use it throughout this presentation, but we want to emphasize that it doesn't mean it's good or bad. There's no winners or losers. It's just some interesting trends that we've come up with that we hope you'll find interesting too. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the, we did this between 2001 and 2016, and Jason will tell you why we use those years, but just in that snapshot of time, Virginia developed or converted from rural or open space to development 129,000 acres of land. That's about equal to a smaller size county, roughly like New Kent County. Or another way of looking at it is if you took Richmond, Norfolk, and Roanoke land areas combined, that's roughly 129,000 acres. So, you know, the pace of development here, and keep in mind this time period included the Great Recession here, is pretty good in Virginia. I guess the good news is if you project this out over time and how much of Virginia is built out, we still got another 2,000 years or so before we're all built out and developed. But I'll turn it back to Jason and he'll talk about methodology.
Yeah, fun topic for Monday. So if you're a planner and you have a good set of reliable parcel data that has attributes on land use, on dwelling units or square feet or square footage of residential or non-residential, you can perform a pretty accurate density calculation. However, working with parcel data can be time consuming, especially when you're dealing with multiple localities and different assessor offices. And so if you want to get in some cases, the parcel attribute data might be hard to get your hands on and its reliability might not be great either. So in these cases, we've approached a methodology that looks at net density of land using the National Land Cover data set. And I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide what that is. Some of you may be familiar with it already. And we've embraced this approach to understand net density at a regional level because largely our work with VTrans at the state level, as well as when we work on projects that cover multiple jurisdictions, whether they're scenario planning projects or regional connector study projects. The goal here, again, is to look at net density, not gross density. In other words, the people and jobs over net developed land, land that has some kind of activity on it, some built environment. For example, if you use the total gross acreage of a jurisdiction for density, it sort of distorts the picture of what's actually happening on the ground. Let me give you 3 examples here, just the difference between gross acres and net developed acres in 3 different localities. We have Albemarle County, Virginia Beach, and Danville. These numbers, these gross acres versus net acres, are the denominator in the equation of the net density. So you can see how it would, for example, 464,000 gross acres in Albemarle versus 13,150 net developed acres in Albemarle. It's a very different picture of density that you get when using developed land. Again, why activity unit over net developed acres? Activity units represent people and jobs. It's not dwelling units, and it's not just population. And it's good to count both of those because that represents the totality of activity happening on the space, on the built environment. Growth is not just new residential, it's also commercial. And we understand that employment growth is often very important. People need to look at it for transportation work. It's a attractor of trips. That people also represent trip generation. So when looking at it's a good sense to look at activity unit over net developed land is one might think it's double counting, but it's really not because it's all the activity that's happening on the built environment. Let me see here. Where am I? Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the data. We have the activity density data we obtained. These are all publicly available data. We use the US Census American Community Survey for population. We use the US Census LEHD data for 2001 and 2016 for employment. And for the land development, we use the National Land Cover data set. And I'm going to post, actually Paige is going to post some links to where we got these data from. So the land cover data, and this is a picture over here, it's simplified. There are actually many more types of land cover that are shown, but there's 4 categories. And this is all a 30 by 30 meter grid resolution. So it's a raster data set. It's satellite imagery that detects color, and from color, it detects through various algorithms, they detect what's on the ground, whether it's shrubland, farmland, or developed land. They don't distinguish between residential, nor do they distinguish between non-residential. They just group, there's 4 levels of intensity for the built environment. Open space developed, there's low, medium, and high. And Things like developed open space are things like lawn or golf or even roads, golf courses or lawns or ball fields can even be considered part of that open space, but it's still developed land. Those 4 categories are 21 through 24. And those are the ones we use for calculating net developed land in this approach. So, and then why did we use 2001 to 2016? Well, those are the dates that the USGS has flown satellite imagery and obtained data for them. And so they have 2001, they have 2006, 2011, and 2016. And to keep it simple, just for this analysis, we wanted to keep the bookends, 2001 and 2016, so we can get a good sense of what's happening in a 15-year period. The links to some of the data, I think Paige is going to post, but I'll also show them right here. All publicly available data. If you have questions about them later on, we can address some of those, but they are out there. There's also a nice page that's put up by the, I think it's Virginia. I'll have to dig it up. It actually has the ArcGIS map of all the NLCD for the Commonwealth of Virginia maps for each one of these years, including the interim years of 2006 and 2011. So again, just the National Land Cover data is a series of definitive Landsat-based 30-meter resolution land cover that provides a spatial reference and descriptive data for all land surface, including urban, agricultural, forest, impervious surfaces, tree canopy, and things like that. We're going to scroll a couple areas of Virginia. This is 2001. It's the area around Richmond. And if I have I'm going to toggle back and forth between these. You might want to take a look at some of the areas that change. For example, 2001, and I'm going to go to 2016 and highlight some areas like in here. There we go. And I also have a screenshot of Northern Virginia. And when we toggle back and forth in here, look at places of Western Loudoun and Eastern Loudoun and Western Prince William County. So you'll see land converted from undeveloped to developed land, one of those classifications. All right. So the red is a combination of all the 21 through 24 of the National Land Cover data set. And for example, if you look at the pace of development in Eastern Loudoun, 2001, 2016, sorry about that. I think this is 2011. Vlad, do you want to mention where this is right here in Eastern Loudoun?
Yeah, this is just, yeah, that should be 2001, sorry. This is just taking a section of Eastern Loudoun around Brambleton, and it's a 15-year slice there from 2001 to 2016, just showing how quickly things can change. Of course, it's one of the highest growing localities in the nation, but yeah, I'm sure a lot of you have done this on Google Earth. You just look at the same area a few years ago and toggle back and forth just to see the pace of change.
Excellent.
Back to you.
Yeah, so we have another little polling question. So we have here listed on our screen, I think there's 10 or so counties, localities, and they are in the top 20. But I'm going to launch this poll, and you can do multiple choice with this poll. Let's see, where is that poll page? I got it. Who's in the top 4? All right, I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And when it comes up, we want you to click 4 localities that you think are in the top 4 of these. Hope I explained that correctly. So there's 10 counties here. We want you to choose the top 4, what you think the top 4 fastest growing in terms of growth of population and jobs between 2001 and 2016.
And no Googling while you're doing this.
All right. We have 65 of 93, 73 of 93, 80%
I think
reporting.
that last one should be probably Prince William County. It says Virginia Beach City and Prince William County. Let's call that one Prince William County.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. And I'm going to share results. Okay. Loudoun was a clear winner from this group. It looks like our duplicate of Virginia Beach and Prince William also received a high number, although those are doubled. Stafford got honorable mention, as did Chesterfield County. So let's do the reveal and actually show what the top 4 of the top 20 are. They are Loudoun. You guys were correct. You got it, nailed it. Loudoun County, Fairfax County, Prince William County, and Chesterfield. These are the top 4 localities that had the most growth in jobs and population between 2001 and 2016. Did I share the results with you? There we go. All right. Great. So let's keep going. We have one more question. We have, this is another poll. Who's not in the top 20? So we have of these localities, one of them is not in the top 20. So here's where you're clicking on the one where you think is not. You choose one. Fauquier, Campbell, Rockingham, Suffolk City, Richmond City. All right. 70%. I'm going to go ahead. It's 80% have voted. I'm going to end the poll and share results this time. All right. You all said it was Campbell County. And this is not meant to be a gotcha moment because this is just, we don't expect people to know this at the top of their head, but sort of intuitively you said Campbell County. In fact, the answer is Richmond is not in the top 20. But here's the reveal. It's basically the change in activity units from 2001 to 2016, looking at both jobs and population. These are the top 20. Let me go in there and highlight, bring it up a little bit larger for you to see. We have Loudoun, Fairfax, Prince William, Chesterfield, Arlington, Stafford, Henrico, Alexandria, Spotsylvania, Virginia Beach City, Albemarle, James City, Chesapeake, Hanover, Suffolk, Frederick, Norfolk City, Campbell, Fauquier, and Rockingham are all in there. But Loudoun, Fairfax, and Prince William and Chesterfield are certainly leading the way, as people probably intuitively can guess. Vlad, you want to take us into some of the stories about the data?
Yeah, notice that was 82% of the growth in Virginia in that time period was those localities. And bravo for folks. Richmond was the second vote getter. So you almost guessed which one was not in the top 20. As we look at kind of stories in the data and we start putting this on a map, as you might expect, there's this eastern band of high growth localities, the Northern Virginia localities, the Hampton Roads localities, James City County, and then your Richmond area localities. Some people call that the Fertile Crescent or the Golden Crescent, but you're also getting this middle band of high growth localities. So Rockingham, Albemarle, and Campbell County, somewhat surprisingly, is high growth in the top 20. And it begs the question, which ones in that period grew more sprawling or more densely? So we'll explore that in the next round of slides.
Yep.
Next slide. Yeah, so now we're looking at, that was just growth in activity units. Now we're looking at land conversion. These are the top 20 counties or localities, rather, that changed from undeveloped to developed land in terms of acres. And that represents 69% of the statewide land conversion. You can see the similar pattern there in the high growth localities, or also the high land conversion. Next slide. A bit of a delay on my end. There you go. Okay, so when you start mapping this, so land conversion or land development is similar to high growth. You got your first fertile crescent here. Alexandria and Arlington have dropped out because they're growing up, not out. You know, they have growth, but they're not converting a lot of land. Notice that Hampton Roads localities are here, but not Norfolk or Portsmouth, or the kind of older cities. And then you've got the similar middle band. Rockham, Augusta is in here now, Albemarle, Campbell, and all the way out to Montgomery County. So we're going to start, next slide, comparing land conversion to activity unit growth. And Danny's going to talk about a potential efficiency factor.
Thanks, Vlad. So we had this really interesting data looking at land development and conversion of land from undeveloped to developed over a 15-year period. And we also had data on the growth of population and jobs. And since planners are really interested in understanding densification and sprawl trends, we looked for ways to try to look at a relationship between these two and see what trends we can find in the Commonwealth. So we're calling this very simple ratio a land development efficiency factor. We simply take the growth in activity units, that's population and jobs, over the number of acres that are converted from undeveloped to developed in the time period. So let's take a look at the next slide. So if you were to plot both growth in activity units and the conversion of land on a Y and X axis like this, you would see on the top left jurisdictions that add a lot of people and jobs but are not converting a lot of land. So we would say that they're becoming more dense. And then in the opposite corner, places that are not adding many people and jobs but are converting a lot of land, that's, you know, we would say that's a sprawling jurisdiction. And then in the top right, these are places that are just growing across the board, both in terms of developed land and people. And in the bottom left would be places that are just not growing very much at all. Next slide. So here we've taken all of the cities and counties in Virginia, and we've plotted them on this chart. And the dashed yellow line is kind of showing you what's about average in terms of the relationship between activity growth and land conversion. So if you're above the line, we would say that you're kind of growing more dense on average. If you're below, you're more sprawling than the average. So just to point out a couple interesting cases here, Loudoun County, like we mentioned before, is growing in nearly all respects. It's the top grower in terms of population and jobs, and it's also top as far as converting land from undeveloped to developed. Fairfax County is up there. It's number 2 in terms of adding people and jobs, but it's converted far fewer acres of land to development in this 15-year period. Below the line, we see Chesterfield County, Henrico, Virginia Beach, among others, that are experiencing some growth in population and jobs, but are actually adding quite a bit of developed acres. And I think it's interesting to compare, Alexandria and Henrico and Virginia Beach, because these are places that are adding about the same number of population and jobs, around 50,000 in this 15-year period. But you see that the way that they're growing on the land is very different. Alexandria, Arlington, these are places that I think we all know are fairly mature. They don't have a lot of undeveloped land sitting around. So when they grow, as far as population and jobs, they're doing it on land that's probably already developed. Whereas Virginia Beach, Henrico, Chesterfield, when they grow, they are expanding their footprint over the land. Next slide, please.
There we go.
So here we've taken this land development efficiency ratio, and we've simply shown you the top 20. So if you're at the top of this list, this means that the ratio is higher, which means you're adding more people and jobs per acre of land that you're converting to development. So, it's really interesting. There are 3 Northern Virginia cities and counties that are far above the rest of Virginia as far as this ratio. But then when you move down the list, you'll see that there is a pretty smooth line as you go down in the ranking. And when we first started looking at this, I thought we'd see a relationship between land development efficiency and the type of jurisdiction that it is, whether that be urban, rural, or suburban. But we were kind of surprised to see quite a few rural areas that are developing land about as efficiently as many urban and suburban areas. So there's not a real clear relationship between the type of place that it is and its land development efficiency factor. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here we've simply mapped what we showed you on the previous slide. So these are all the cities and counties, and a darker blue color means that it has a higher land development efficiency factor. And I'm going to turn this over to Vlad to talk about kind of what are some of the stories that we're seeing here with this data.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. If you haven't guessed already, there's a bit of a quandary, a bit of a puzzle that we want to ask you to help us solve is why we're seeing these patterns, especially if you're one of these localities. So this is mapping the top 20 most efficiently growing localities between 2001 and 2016. And you've got, a much more smaller group of Northern Virginia, basically Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria, and then the other cities in Northern Virginia. But then you've got this band in the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula. Not sure what's going on there. King George, Essex, King and Queen, King William. These are pretty small in terms of population, rural counties. And then you got Norfolk there growing efficiently, the sole one in the top 20 in Hampton Roads. And then look at that western band in the Piedmont, starting with Clark County, Madison, Orange, Fluvanna, Buckingham, Appomattox, Campbell. What do these guys have in common? So if keep in mind what Paige said, put some things in the Q&A or in the chat and let us know if you have any thoughts on this. We'll turn it back to you in a minute. Next slide. So just looking at a little deeper at that activity growth versus sprawl or densification. On the left, you've got your growth in the yellow. It's the top growth localities in terms of activity units. On the right, you've got efficiency. So Alexandria and Arlington obviously are the winners in efficiency. They're building up, not out. So keep in mind the way we're looking at this will also factor in redevelopment and not just greenfield. So redevelopment will not show up as new developed land, but it will show up as activity units growing. So that'll come up much more efficiently. And then there's a faint red line in there that shows some, again, question marks. Campbell County grew more efficiently than Prince William County. Fauquier County grew more efficiently than Virginia Beach over this time frame. Again, wondering why. Next slide. And if you take out the top two, Arlington, Alexandria, so this is the same chart, but with those top two knocked out, so you can see a little more of the relationships between them. Again, on the left is land conversion, and on the right is efficiency. So you can see that Fairfax, Loudoun, or Albemarle were the most efficiently growing, but you see some anomalies like Augusta County, which is a fairly rural county, it includes the Blue Ridge and everything, grew more efficiently than Richmond. And we don't know why, we have some speculations, but we're interested in what you think. One thought maybe that places like Albemarle and Loudoun have fairly rigid growth boundaries. Is that one reason that in that time frame they grew more efficiently than others? Not sure. Next slide. bit of a delay. Jason, did you click that already?
Yep, I'm seeing why does it matter?
Okay, it's not on my end, but I'll read that. Hopefully you guys can see why does it matter. So yeah, as we close out and turn it back to you. And I should start, qualify this a little more. We started this research when we were doing some work for VTrans under OIPI, but this isn't none of this material you've seen was done for OIPI. This is our own kind of speculation using the same data sources, or our own analysis, I should say. So it's not OIPI work, but it was inspired by it. So why does this matter? You've probably seen a lot of studies on the benefits of compact development. This is one from Smart Growth America back in 2013 that showed that compact development had an average of 38% less in capital costs. So your roads, your water, your sewer, things like that, 10% less in service delivery, fire, police, etc., and then a whopping 10 times more tax revenue per acre, which is not surprising. If you put more potatoes into the same size bag, it's going to weigh more. But this just highlights why it's important to look at these kind of trends, try to understand what's going on with, wisely stewarding public investments that are needed to pay for growth. It is important to consider the efficiency of that growth. So I guess we have one more slide, but I want to encourage you again to put some comments in the chat or the Q&A. It looks like someone started that already. So appreciate that.
Can other people see what's in the chat? Maybe that's a question.
Say that again.
No, just the panelists are seeing the chat.
Okay. Yeah, either chat or Q&A. So last slide. Well, on that map, obviously not all statistics tell a story. Only one country has more Super Bowl wins than any other country. So you don't want to do a map just to kind of state the obvious, but we think there's some patterns in this mapping and this data that we're trying to understand. Want to ask you, was this predictable? Were the high growth and high land consumption or conversion localities the ones you thought they would be? Why do you think that the highest growth localities are not always the most efficient? Why do we get this band of Northern Neck, Western Piedmont localities that scored very high on the land efficiency factor? And then lastly, what are we missing? What else should we be looking at? Is this an interesting direction to go in terms of the data? So, Jason, you want to look at some of our chat comments and then we can try to answer them or share them?
Yeah, I'll be happy to look at some of the chat as well as Q&A page. Let me start with the chat here. I'm going to back it up to, I think that Peter Stevenson said maybe this limited net developable area due to topography. Yes, that would make sense. At some point, cities and localities have topography challenges or limited amounts of land to develop for new development. And so topography could be a limiting factor.
I can take the next one, Jason. Peter Ohm said, some of the anomalies reflect places with very small denominator, not much land conversion. Very true. I don't know if we mentioned it or not, but we did have a threshold of, you had to have 1,000 activity units at least to qualify in our land efficiency calculation.
Right. Yeah, we've found some outliers too. If you look at the places which didn't have, maybe had under 1,000 total activity units change, and some of them appeared very efficient. That's probably because an employer went down and a new, employer went into an existing developed footprint and and maybe spiked the efficiency factor when in fact, really the overall change was compared to other localities in Virginia was not that much. That's why we had that threshold.
Note that Fairfax County, good points. I didn't realize 20% of Fairfax County is parkland. And Jason, the NCLD counts parkland as developed, right?
Well, if it's active park, if it's like a developed, ball field or in a place that is, it'll look at a school and consider the football field of a school developed land, but a developed open space. If a park is in a city, and if it's an active park, like I think, like for example, if you take Charlottesville, like McIntyre Park, large parts of it would be classified as tree or open grassland, but the parts of it that are developed into a ball field or an area with pavement and pervious surface. Yeah, Sarah asked to see the chart of 20 again. We could certainly go back to that.
Yeah. I want to address one of the comments that Gerald Phillips had. Some cases, the disparity is due to built-out communities like City of Norfolk. It can't grow out, so it has to grow up. So not always apples to apples comparison here in terms of growth, efficiency, land conversion. Yes and no. I mean, I'd be interested at what others say, Danny or Jason, on this too. But this does measure, in a way, building up, not out. It measures like if the land area has not changed, no more developed land, but activity units have grown. That shows that it's either it's redevelopment, basically places are densifying that are already developed. So I think it's still valid to count that as growing efficiently, as compared to a greenfield development.
Yep.
National Forest, that's a good point. Augusta, Amanda McGee said Allegheny County has national parkland, national forest. That might be a factor with Augusta County. I know that has a lot of national forest, which kind of enforces a more compact pattern.
And Peter
Ohm.
Yeah, I think he's.
Go ahead.
Peter suggests, I think you should segment the localities by population size and activity unit growth or land conversion and change and compare them within those segments. That's a great next step suggestion, Peter. There's many ways to slice these data. We're actually going to make available the Excel that we use to do this. So if people want to dive into that Excel and look at some of the numbers in different ways, by all means, it's open source. It's all public available data.
Does that mean, and I don't know if you can unmute yourself or what, but Peter, I wanted to ask, would you suggest like putting me into cohorts like suburban localities, urban localities, rural? Well, maybe we can't unmute, but.
Yeah, Peter can.
All right, now I'm unmuted, but yeah, that was basically what I was thinking. But I'm not exactly sure how or which of those characteristics you would use.
Right. Well, actually, we can look at developed land as it is today and activity units and come up with some kind of thresholds for urban, suburban, rural, which would be interesting. I wanted to ask Gerald what this means. Piedmont localities planners have it figured out. They've learned on the backs of others. Oh, I see, because they're not Northern Virginia, so they're already growing efficiently after learning from Northern Virginia's example or something. Yeah, and she also comments that Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck learned from others doing it efficiently and slow to grow historically, so the benefit of understanding the value of planning and planning for efficient growth. I think one of the things we need to look at here to understand it better too is, whether it's jobs or population. Because you think about it, new jobs usually take a lot less land area than new population. Outside of a urban locality, of course, you could have a new factory that employs 200 people and it only takes a handful of acres as compared to low density residential development. So that might be one of the answers. John Harbin says that Virginia Beach has a green line, functions as a growth boundary. Perhaps they include a lot more land north of the green line that allowed for less efficient development. I was wondering the same thing. I brought up the issue of localities that have strict growth controls or boundaries, and Virginia Beach has that, and yet they did not show up as super high efficiency. Where are they on this? They're kind of in the middle of the top 20. Yeah, I don't know. I think, north of their green line, they still have a lot of greenfield land and maybe suburban growth patterns.
Hey, Vlad.
Yeah.
So we have, because this is a webinar, we have the chat. We also have open questions in the Q&A section. So we've been kind of paying attention to the chat, but I think there's some also in the for example, I'll take a couple of these, like Paul, or let's see, Stuart Boggs mentioned Fairfax has been focusing development into transit-oriented development, TOD, around metro rail stations, as well as long major transportation corridors such as Richmond Highway. Yes, and that would explain some of the efficiency that Fairfax County has. If you think of Tyson's Corner is there, and the metro rail, as well as other sort of the high premium transit corridors or transit, would explain some of the efficiency factors from Fairfax, Stuart.
That was an interesting question from Paul Stoddard. I'm sorry, we have maybe be missing some of them, but I'm just kind of picking ones that are interesting to me. Do you have a sense of where a density of 4 units to the acre would fall in the mix? Are places following the general pattern of drivable suburban development? From Paul Stoddard. I think that's a fascinating area to look at here, is what actual density numbers are we coming up with? Because you think about it, this is a net density calculation. The thing to keep in mind is that's activity units per acre rather than residents per acre. But still, that ties in a little bit to Peter's idea of coming up with cohorts and maybe creating some thresholds in there to define suburban or urban development. Let's see, there's Jonathan Knopp said, would it be useful to supplement the analysis, especially for urban areas, by factoring in transitions from developed open space to all other developed cover classifications, e.g. parking lot redeveloped? Huh. Jason,
yeah, I could feel that one. I could feel that one. Yeah. So yeah, I think what Jonathan is getting at, and Jonathan, you can unmute yourself and also clarify your question if I don't answer it correctly or if I misjudged it. But there are 4 different classifications of developed land: open space developed, low, medium, and high. And yeah, for this study, we grouped them all as one area, the built environment. We didn't distinguish between conversions from low to medium or from medium to high. And that would be another sort of next step. You can go in and look at some of the more directly infill related metrics from these data. Again, remember, this is high resolution, not super high resolution data. It's raster data at a 30 by 30 meter grid. So it's not gonna, it's a little coarse, but you can still get a read. I think over the same period of time would be an additional follow-up would be to look at not just land that was converted from, let's say, pasture or tree to some kind of open space, but look at some of the internal conversions from low to medium or medium to high, because they are certainly there as well. I
was seeing some interesting discussion in the chat about water and sewer service areas. So saying that, you know, a lot of these more suburban localities tend to have far-reaching water and sewer service areas, and some of the rural ones have very compact ones by necessity, I guess, only around growth centers. So maybe those are enforcing a more efficient pattern of growth. I think that's a great point. I think that could very well be true, and we should look at kind of in detail some of these to compare that. I also wonder, Jason, is there a possibility that if you have very low density rural development in some of these, you know, I think King William or Prince George counties or something like that, or Amelia, that it's not showing up as developed? I guess it's a 30-meter grid, so a house will show up as developed, but the whole lot won't necessarily if it's in farmland, whereas a suburban lot, the whole quarter acre will show up as developed. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think you're right, Vlad. I just put it up on the screen. Sorry, didn't mean to distract you from what you're talking about. But if people want to look at the land cover, the Virginia DCR has a Virginia land cover change over time, and you can click on different years. You can even zoom into your locality and toggle on and off if you want to take a look. This is essentially an ArcGIS server map that they put up for folks, and it is out there. I put the link in the chat to it.
Oh, there you go.
Did we want to stay in the Q&A box or kind of jump back and forth? Because we do have some extra questions in the Q&A box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take some more.
So the one that I see, could the reason be because of lower density rural zoning limitations on subdivisions, but primarily because rural areas tend to have sewer and water only around towns or development areas?
Yeah, I think that's a good one, kind of what we were talking about, but I'm still wondering, you know, so Eastern Loudoun, you know, all that growth that happened there, that was presumably in a water sewer service area. But how would that be different from like Albemarle County, which has also a very well-defined water sewer service area? Why would one be growing more efficiently than the other within that, you know, already utility served area?
The next question, on the smaller localities, if a few specific employers or development projects blossomed in this period and increased the activity unit proportion, could the residential development still be sprawling?
That's a good question, yeah, from Sarah Hallberg. What we found in general is places that have really good employment growth grow much more efficiently. And, you know, some of this efficient, inefficient growth is the difference between residential or employment growth. One that we noticed was in one of these charts, I think it was Hampton, had negative efficiency, and it's because they lost a ton of jobs probably during the Great Recession there. They still developed land, but the loss of jobs really pushed them into negative efficiency.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I think this is working well, but we could even invite people to unmute if they wanted to.
Okay.
I mean, go ahead and reading them, but I think it's more interactive when people can unmute and hear themselves.
All right, well, we have another question from Jonathan Knopf, so I will let him unmute himself.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the question. So I think this is really, really interesting, and I really appreciate the results and your desire to brainstorm what to do next with this. And so one way to perhaps kind of dig into some of the localities that seem not right or you have questions about would it be possible to use the assessment records for those localities, if they exist, going back to 2001, and if there are helpful land use assignments to each of those parcels, to compare what happened to those parcels across the entire locality from 01 to 2016? Again, only if the data is there. But that would obviously be about as granular as you could get to see which of those parcels switched from one land use or land cover to another. And you could kind of compare the results of, what happens with the raster data set and what happens when you look at actual administrative data. Just a thought that came to mind to me, but maybe totally unworkable depending on data availability.
No, absolutely. That's a great point, Jonathan. I would love to know what's happening in King William to make it one of the most efficiently growing localities. I mean, I think it was activity units. I mean, I think it was jobs more when you looked at it, but still, did they land some big industry or something like that made them jump up like that? So I think that is the right way to do it, is pick a few kind of these outliers and dive into it with local land use data.
Yeah. Good points, Jonathan. Yeah, I think you can go in and look at assessment data. You can crosswalk this with these data here from the land NLCD to maybe explain some of those anomalies or things that were sort of the outliers. But the reason we use these data right here for regional or for big picture, they seem to do a pretty good job at assessing at a broad level density and for assessing trends. I noticed that someone here talked about looking at specific areas of Fairfax and Loudoun to see where they were growing even more efficiently. You would need to probably look at parcel data and do more detailed analysis on where exactly the efficiencies are being derived.
I want to comment on Paul Stoddard's comment here. As a more inclusive measure of population and jobs, could this be mapped to the urban-rural transect? So I want to put a plug in for the multimodal design guidelines by DRPT that some of us at EPR worked on, because that did exactly that. That created a series of place types, 5 place types, I think, based on this activity unit density. And the way it did it was it standardized a geographic area. So it did this 1 mile circle, almost like this cookie cutter or a Roomba that moved around the state, and picked sample densities in this 1 mile circle, and kind of aggregated them into these 5 place types from dense urban to very low density suburban. And that creates, I think, a useful kind of measure for talking about these things. As you pointed out, Paul, things like walkability, what is a rough threshold for walkability or mixed use or things like that.
Okay, I'm just going to let everybody know we are at 12:58, so we have 2 minutes left if you want to get some final comments in and questions in.
Have we responded to George's question, Vlad, in the chat? I know that we're bouncing back and forth, and apologies for being a little chaotic on it, but George asks, well, where a community starts with the density has a lot to do with where it ends up in this efficiency conversion. The older boundary limited cities plus Arlington are the poster children. The one that seems an outlier that I find confusing is Richmond City. Any thoughts as to why? I don't know if you have a thought on that, Vlad, or
He's muted. Hold on,
Vlad's muted.
Sorry about that. One speculation is they lost activity units in the recession, and they may have developed a little bit of land, but it could be that loss of jobs with a little growth in land gives them a very inefficient pattern. Well, I think we're going to wrap up, but I just wanted to thank everyone again and let you know that we are going to look at these chat comments in more detail, and it may spur us to dig deeper into this, and love to read through these, and thank you again for your intelligent commentary.
All right, so I will go ahead and just say thank you again to our presenters, and thank you again to everyone who was able to join us. As a reminder, everything was recorded today, and if your question didn't get addressed or answered, I will be sending all of the chat to our presenters today so that they can follow up with you. But I'll let everybody go, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.